Which Australian has quietly become one of the biggest winners in the rare earths boom? Hello, I'm Rebecca Jones and this is the Bloomberg Australia podcast. In a new story from Bloomberg News, reporters Angus Whitley, Amy Bainbridge and Ainsley Thompson trace how Australia's richest person, Gina Rinehart, has come to be in the centre of a geopolitical supply chain struggle. Today on the podcast, we zoom into just one of those moves. Last week, Rinehart's company, Hancock Prospecting, said it's almost doubling its stake in the ASX-listed Arafura Rare Earths. Reporter Angus Whitley is here with me now to break down that move and to look at where that places Rinehart in the list of the world's richest. Angus, let's start with the basics. What exactly has Rinehart done?
Yeah, hi, Beth. Let's look at what Hancock Prospecting did. That's, of course, her investment company. And effectively, it doubled its stake in Arafura Rare Earths from about 8% up to about 15% by taking more than its fair share of a 475 million Australian dollar stock placement. And this investment, it really is the culmination of a lot of events this year. And it tells us quite a lot about what's been happening and what's going to happen in the next few years, I feel.
Now, let's talk about Rinehart herself. Now, she's made her fortune in iron ore. Why make such a big bet on rare earths? And she's not just investing here, right?
She's not. She is, of course, best known for making billions out of iron ore. The last 2 or 3 decades, that was essentially, she was synonymous with iron ore from the Pilbara region in Western Australia. And she has wealth of 30 billion, almost all of it from iron ore. But about 5 years ago, way before anyone had started talking about rare earths, she started investing in the sector. And she now has a portfolio that we reckon is the world's biggest individual collection of rare earths assets anywhere outside China. And it spans not just Arafura Rare Earths in the Northern Territory, but Lynas Rare Earths, which operates in Malaysia and in Australia, Brazilian Rare Earths, which is prospecting over in Brazil, and MP Materials, which is probably the best known of the lot, America's only producing rare earths mine, in which the Department of Defense or the Department of War took a stake in July. So because she was already in these assets way before the world started really taking a keen interest on it. When I say the world, I mean governments this year. She has been the beneficiary of a stampede towards rare earth stocks. And what we found is when governments started realizing they needed more of these assets and a steady supply of rare earths and rare earth magnets, they kept running into Gina Rinehart because she was already invested in a lot of these assets that they were relying on to produce for them outside China. And that's really been the driver of a lot of her wealth gains, round about $2 billion worth of gains just from her investments in rare earths around the world this year.
That is, it's as you describe it, it's quite a global portfolio that is being built here. Angus, can we remind listeners why rare earths are just so important?
It's funny, isn't it? They are so important, but there's been a global awakening to that fact, if you like, only this year, when China started putting curbs in it. And it was really only then that there was a wide global recognition that it was important for global allies, Western allies, I should say, led by the US and Europe, that they needed to build a supply chain of rare earth and refined rare earths that didn't rely on China. Because if China switched off the tap, they'd really be in a bit of a pickle because so many things rely on rare earth magnets. And I'm talking household goods like vacuum cleaners, smartphones, electric cars, defense weaponry, high-tech weaponry. So if governments are going to have ready access to those, then they need to have a supply chain of their own because they can't rely on China for that in perpetuity.
And do you have any stats around exactly how dominant China is in this sector?
It's pretty much a monopoly. It's about 70% of global production and 90% of the rare earth magnets. So the rest of the world is starting from a very low base, and it's going to take a long time to build out these supply chains to a stage where they're really providing a steady, reliable stream of product that's going to secure those supply chains.
So any disruption in China leaves us all up the creek. It hits everyone else, basically.
Outside China, yes, unless you have agreements with China and you're on good terms, that it's a perfect thing to weaponize if you're in China's position, because it's a relatively small thing, but it has a huge impact on economies and households and defense sectors. It's a great weapon to have in your back pocket. And in Gina Rinehart's position, she's found she has been a huge beneficiary of that. And the rare earth assets that she is backing have become really highly sought after among governments, and we've seen them really putting money into those to accelerate the production timelines of the mining companies that aren't yet in production. And outside China, there's really only two. That's MP Materials and Lynas Rare Earths. And
she's got stakes in both of them, right? I guess I think you're framing the thinking about this and the broader context of the tussle for rare earths around governments is quite an interesting one, because also the timing of all this is quite interesting too. There was that big meeting in the White House between Donald Trump and Anthony Albanese just in October. Is this one of those rare stories where geopolitics, mining and markets are all colliding?
I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. There's a lot of rhetoric that always surrounds these meetings at the White House between leaders, but effectively it boils down to two countries combining to accelerate a supply of rare earths by targeting projects and funding projects for each other's country. And one of those projects, which was the beneficiary of some of those funds, was Arafura Rare Earths. It's developing its Nolans project, which is in the Northern Territory, at 130 kilometres north of Alice Springs. When I spoke to the chairman, Mark Southey, he said they're going to be in production maybe sometime in 2030. So we've seen Arafura take advantage of that commitment from the government. So it's no coincidence that a few days after that agreement, Arafura Rare Earths is raising money, because there's been such a stampede for these stock prices. Why wouldn't you raise money using your own stock when the stock prices are so high? So it's really, while the attention is on these companies, they're making hay while the sun shines.
Finally, Angus, where does this place Gina Rinehart now in the order of billionaires? It's something that we track very closely at Bloomberg. Does this tussle for rare earths globally vault her much higher up the ranks? How's she going?
She's doing pretty well. I mean, she is Australia's richest person, and this year her wealth has gone up 28% to $32 billion US. A large chunk of that is because of her rare earths investment. Now, that places her 10th in the world amongst female billionaires, round about 70th when you include the males too. But I think it's interesting looking at her position. If you look at the names that surround her position in the world, like she's 10. At number 8 is Mackenzie Scott, the technology billionaire, former wife of Jeff Bezos, the Amazon founder. But below her, you've got billionaires who perhaps you could say have made the money from older industries rather than rare earths. I'm talking automobiles, perhaps one of the standout inventions of the 19th century, rather the 20th century. Oil, energy, things that were peak oil was in the era of the 1980s. So in one sense, you can see Gina Rinehart almost at her record levels of wealth, just a few $100 million short of $32.3 billion US, pushing to that threshold with the aid of 21st century investments in rare earths. So there's a nice kind of backdrop to that kind of ranking.
Angus Whitley, thank you for joining me. To read more about Gina Rinehart's fortune, Hancock Prospecting and the rare earths industry, check out our complete report on Bloomberg.com. This episode was recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri and Gadigal people. It was produced by Paul Allen. Our special thanks go out to Chester Dawson, Rachel Chang and Emily Cadman. I'm Rebecca Jones, and I'll see you next week.